Hi there, day after budget speech 2020. Let's have a look at some aspects of the budget, perhaps from a slightly different angle compared to most of the analyses thus far. Let's kick off with the basic budget numbers. So for the year that lies ahead, the Minister has budgeted spending by government of close to 2 trillion rand. Tax revenue, 1.6 billion rand, leaving a shortfall of around about 370 billion rand. Now, if we take an even closer look at the budget arithmetic, the fact that we have a so-called budget deficit is not unusual for most countries on this planet. So the worrying thing, however, is that this is yet another fairly big deficit, close to 6% of the GDP, on top of a number of preceding deficits. As a result, the government debt ratio, that is the ratio of government debt to GDP, which was a very satisfactory 28% 15 years ago, has now raced beyond 60%, and according to the estimates in 3 years' time, in excess of 70%. And herein lies a dilemma, because it is imperative that the rate of growth of that government debt needs to be stalled. It is becoming almost unsustainable. But the basic arithmetic shows us to slow down the growth in the government debt, you either need to slow down or perhaps even reduce government spending and or raise taxes. And this becomes a very difficult, almost impossible juggling act. Just to drive home the importance of the need to slow these things down, one or two very simple calculations show us that the interest we are paying right now, or the year that lies ahead, on the debt incurred in previous years is around about 229 billion rand. That is more or less the same amount budgeted for the year that lies ahead for healthcare. Or, if you like, the 229 billion rands worth of interest is roughly 4% of the GDP. Meanwhile, this country's agricultural sector, its contribution to the GDP is barely 2%. So if you like, we can say the interest that we are paying on previously incurred debt is double the size of the contribution made by our agricultural sector to the economy. The story gets even worse. Inasmuch as we have a deficit, it is sad to note that this deficit is incurred primarily because of these interest payments. In fact, put slightly differently, we are borrowing money to pay interest on debt incurred in previous years. This is simply not sustainable. So, if one of the major objectives should have been, and one would hope would have been, to reduce these kind of numbers, then we go back to the question of how to do that. Lower government spending or raise taxes. Now, of course, the good news for consumers is there are hardly any major tax changes. The normal sin taxes, of course, the fuel levy went up, but the VAT rate did not go up, as anticipated in some circles, and personal income tax rates did not go up. In fact, if anything, there was moderate tax relief. This is all well and good. It's wonderful. Right now, today, as a taxpayer, I am delighted. But it does mean, given the implication for this growing government debt, that taxpayers in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, 20 years' time, 30 years' time, our children, our grandchildren, will actually be paying tax in 30 years' time to finance the deficit of today. So great news for taxpayers right now, not so great for future taxpayers. To add to the concern, that there is a very contentious, perhaps unexpected announcement that one way of trimming or at least slowing down the growth of government spending is to reduce the government civil servant wage bill. Now, whilst that might make all kinds of economic sense, it of course is a highly politically loaded decision. We have already seen the backlash within minutes from organized labor. Because one could understand the argument is that workers in the civil service are now the ones who are paying the price for the government's own mismanagement and excessive spending in the past. If this doesn't work, if the minister's plans to reduce the civil service wage bill don't materialize, it's going to make this kind of arithmetic even more difficult to balance. It would mean that government spending would be higher than anticipated, this deficit being higher than anticipated, the debt grows at an even higher rate. I would also like to just point out that for every 100 rands worth of taxes that you and I pay, roughly 12 rand goes towards paying interest on debt. Another 14 rand goes towards financing our social grant system. Another 33 rand goes towards paying civil servant salaries. And another roughly 4% this year will go towards additional financial assistance for our state-owned enterprises. So more than 60 rand out of 100 worth of tax goes towards interest on previously incurred debt, social grants, which are very important, but is a form of current spending, wages, again, understandable, that's a form of current spending, and then again, atoning for the sins of the past with regard to financial state-owned enterprises. That leaves less than 40 rand out of every 100 rands worth of tax to pay for education, health, and all these other arguably far more important issues. So, to perhaps start summarizing, in many ways, the budget speech, or elements of the budget speech, came as a pleasant surprise. Taxpayers this year are not going to be compromised through the budget. That's great news, and it should support, to some extent, consumer spending. But in many ways, it's also simply kicking the tin further down the road, kicking the can further down the road, and postponing the inevitable. A big question people are asking is, what impact will this have on the Moody's ratings, the long-awaited, long-anticipated gradings? Will Moody's give us junk bond status? It's difficult to say. I don't think the budget itself provides good reasons for not lowering, not downgrading us. By the same token, Moody's might see it as being neutral. But either way, I am convinced that the markets out there have actually looked at this, they're pricing it in, have already priced it into their decisions, and in many ways, maybe a junk bond rating by Moody's will make much of a difference. I think most of the damage has been done already. The one lingering result of the downgrading would, of course, be that any new money borrowed by the government would have to offer even higher interest rates to reluctant buyers of our bonds. And that would simply exacerbate an earlier point, namely by raising even further the share of interest payments in total government spending. So good news in the short term, but very little news in the budget regarding a really substantial plan for longer-term economic growth, longer-term sustainable economic growth that creates jobs, reduces poverty, and reduces inequality. We are still lacking a longer-term vision. It's almost like this budget is putting on a band-aid, and that band-aid will drop off in a few months' time. So mixed feelings for many consumers, many taxpayers, seemingly good news, and the longer term, I think we have created a number of potential problems.